In your own definition, what is a natural disaster?
So my definition, I suppose, anything from nature that would cause mass disruption and death, and destruction to the economy, and that sort of thing.
Okay, and what's the worst natural disaster in your opinion?
Now, you mean historically or the type that could be the
The
worst?
type.
I suppose an asteroid hitting the world would probably be the worst.
Okay, so what's the worst natural disaster in your
I
opinion?
would say earthquake.
Earthquake? Yeah. And what's worse, a natural disaster or a man-made disaster?
I think man-made.
Usually natural disaster is worse because it involves much larger. You can usually clean up after a man-made disaster. A natural disaster is a much greater size.
Okay. And what do you think can be done to prevent natural disasters?
Well, one thing to do is just pay attention to the where you are and the areas where because often they'll occur in cycles, and they'll occur in patterns. And so if you pay attention to those cycles and patterns, you can plan around them. Like flooding tends to take place in flood zones, and you can move the population out of there, or give them incentives to move out, and so on. So that the worst disasters tend to happen in cycles, and you can usually avoid them.
Okay.
Keep studying. I don't think you can do anything about it. No.
And do you think will governments do enough already to help people who have been in natural disasters?
Yes, but it's something else that is more have to be done.
That's a good question. I actually work for FEMA, so I actually
Really?
Yeah, it's actually a good question. Do they do enough? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I think that they sometimes they don't have the resources to do it. Now, a lot of that though has to do with the people themselves. People like to live, for example, next to rivers, and rivers that's where you get floods, and they like to live in earthquake zones, and that's where you get earthquakes. So that's going to be a problem for them. And if you give them too much relief, then of course they just rebuild, and the same problem happens over again. So probably not quite enough, but I'm not sure.
Can I ask you a question on what it's like to be in FEMA?
To be in FEMA? Well, it's not as glamorous as it may sound. I'm not one of those who travels around to different areas and travels around and sees the disaster sites so much. I actually work in an office in Denton near here. But it's I can be on the phones and talk to applicants and disaster survivors, and I also work in cases, people applying for aid and review their cases. So it can be exciting. It can be interesting.
All right, well, thank you, sir.